think it was going to be there. But there was going to be revenge attacks. We had also, I can recall having many phone calls coming in from the vice presidents of the various units, from engineers, from people saying, we're hearing this. There were many rumors that were coming in. This was something that, out of those rumors, I had deducted this from it and taken it forward. And we had obviously, at the planning sessions the night before, the morning, tried to deal with it, sir.
So practically your deployments then, as a result of this information, would cater for the revenge factor?
Would cater for within our limitations, within our abilities, and that's why I think it was the previous brief, I was very clear to say to my executive that we were trying to secure additional, because of additional vehicles, additional things, and we were having a hard time because they'd been taken up by many other companies. So yes, our planning would have been around that, and we were trying to put this holistic picture over, Mr. Chair.
The revenge would have been more likely against NUM, considering the background, than against Lonman structures and key points.
Definitely. The NUM members, and we weren't really focusing on our infrastructure, our people. We didn't. When I did this, I did not believe that we were going to be subject of a revenge attack. My own personal opinion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sinclair. I'm so sorry to have interrupted you, Mr.
Thank you, Commissioner. Chair, my time is up, but there is, with respect, one necessary follow-up question.
We did take
May
some
I put
of your
that?
time up. I think it's only fair that I was
Thank you,
give
Chair.
you the benefit of that.
Yes,
Not
it's just one follow-up item. Mr. Sinclair, thank you for the evidence you've given, which clarifies matters very, very substantially. There is one follow-up question that is important. Having identified the possibility of this potential mass revenge attack, did you satisfy yourself as to what the practical planning steps were that would be implemented by Lonman Security if indeed this potential revenge attack materialized? Specifically, if it became apparent that a group of strikers were gathering, that it was evident at least that they might be gathering in order to carry out the sort of attack that you had identified, what was in place to deal with that situation if it materialized? And did you satisfy yourself as to the adequacy of whatever may have been planned?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I was not in a comfortable space with the whole position, and I'll be very blunt with it. I was not in a comfortable space because we did not have, with this thing that had happened on the march on the Friday and the issue on the Saturday, that we were now stretched across the whole of the property. This was virtually the first time that we had been that extended. That's why my brief about we are not able to get in resources that we require, and I believe it was the brief the day before this. However, with what we had, we definitely had strategized on where best to place and on the boards and the way we worked in that room. And I'm just sorry that you actually never came there and saw how we operated. It would make this conversation a lot easier. But how we worked and how they were deployed and what was going on, I was on Friday and Saturday. If I'd done this brief at this time, I would have obviously had input from early in the morning, very early in the morning, that these were going on. So I believe we had things in place, and who would be controlling what and who would be going where to deal with potentials was and where were the possibilities of this revenge attack taking place. So, yes, I hope I've answered your question. Yes, there had been input by me. I do not know how Henry had missed it. There had been input by me. The teams in place, and I can't find, those were the lists that you asked me to go back and find. Can't find who were the actual respondents. I've got an example of how we do it. So I've got a very good example of how we did it in our format, who would have been in place, and I was satisfied under the circumstances, not knowing what was going to, not knowing the exact outcomes, and not going in and saying, well, this was a possibility or this was a possibility. Time was just against us to actually get those details in place. But certainly, I think we had put the maximum effort within our capabilities in place to deal with it, Mr. Chair. Does that, did I
Thank
answer
you,
the
Mr.
question?
Sinclair.
Did I
Well,
answer the question?
we have the answer, Chair. Thank you. Those are our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Who's next, Mr. Wesley? Ms. Pillay applied.
Pillay,
She told me that she'd anticipated certain points would be raised by other council. Other council decided not to utilize their time, so she applied for an hour, which I granted.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to kick off with a bit of housekeeping, Chair, we have one new exhibit, which is File 2, Tab 15. It's an annexure to the ICAM report. It's File 2, Tab 15 of the ICAM report. It's an annexure to the ICAM report. That's correct. It will be quadruple F10.
Yes. So quadruple F10 will be File 2, Tab 15 of the ICAM.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sinclair.
Hello, ma'am.
Mr. Sinclair, if we can kick off with quadruple D2, which is the ICAM report. And specifically, page 1 of the report, just so that we can be clear on the purpose of the ICAM report. Now, we see from page 1, Mrs. Sinclair, that the purpose is fourfold. It's firstly to identify the causes of the incidents which are dealt with in the report. Secondly, to identify contributory factors. Thirdly, to determine lessons learned. And fourthly, to make recommendations on possible areas of improvement in order to improve management of security and emergency, in order to prevent recurrence of those incidents. Do you see that?
I see that, Mr. Chair.
And that's consistent with your understanding of the purpose of the ICAM report.
That is what I understand, Mr. Chair.
Now, we see further on page 1 of the report, Mr. Sinclair, that the ICAM report initially refers to 9 incidents listed on pages 1 and 2 of the report. But we know that ultimately the ICAM report only dealt in any amount of detail with 2 incidents. Of the 9 incidents, it only dealt in detail with incidents 2 and incidents 2 and what was the second one? I'm just struggling to find the second incident. I have a note of it somewhere. Sorry, incidents 2 and 3, isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, my understanding of the report and the way this report was dealt with was through Henry Blow. He was the key figure in security that was dealing with the ICAM and the ICAM team. That they were dealing, my understanding is that they were dealing with they had been tasked with 4 of the 9. That is my understanding. However, if you are now sharing with me that it's only 2 of the 9, then my understanding was that it was 4 of the 9.
Well, if we look at the summary on page 1 and 2 of the report, you will see that the ICAM team goes through each of the incidents they were meant to look at, incidents 1 to 9, and set out that essentially they didn't conduct thorough investigations into the 7 of the incidents because they were either subject to police investigation or they didn't have enough information to conclude their investigations.
If
So
I
they
look-
only concluded investigations in relation to incidents 2 and incidents 3.
If I look at which report that
The
says they
same
only-
report where we are now,
This-
pages
this
1 and
report.
2. Yes.
Yes.
You'll see from the summaries which appear on page 1 and 2 that the ICAM team only made conclusions in relation to 2 of the incidents listed in the report.
Mr. Chair, I don't understand that, and I think it would be appropriate for me to comment on that, because to my understanding that there were 4 timelines and issues that were done.
All right.
But
We
I
leave-
stand
Yes,
corrected.
we leave incident 1 aside now because that doesn't really deal with this Commission's terms of reference. I'm referring specifically to the incidents relevant to this Commission's terms of reference. It's only conclusions in relation to incidents 2 and 3.
Because of this commission's.
No,
Okay.
the ones that are relevant
All
to
right,
this
so
Commission.
the ICAM, that is correct. The ICAM, to my understanding, dealt with incident 1 because it was prior and it
Yes.
would help them. It dealt with incident 2, definitely. It dealt with the incident at K4,
That's Mr. Mabuse.
and it dealt with the incident at Eastern Platinum with the man that was killed at the railway line. That is my understanding.
Well, let's deal with the last one. That's the incident relating to Mr. Langer. Is that correct, that you're referring to?
That's what I'm referring to, Mr. Chair.
That's dealt with in the ICAM report as incident 4.
That's correct.
And if we look at the summary on the first page of the report, it states that Mr. Langer was found dead in the vicinity of the EPL pump station and the railway line directly north of Safi Shaft with stab wounds after an anonymous tip-off was received at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. It is a suspected case of intimidation, as witnesses interviewed claim that he left his home at approximately 3 o'clock on his way to work.
I hear that.
Now, if we go to the portion of the report where incident 4 is dealt with, and if you could ask that we go down to where incident 4 is dealt with in the ICAM report, and if you'll see from page 4 of the report that where incident 4 is summarized, it states the Lonman investigation docket, file 2, tab 14, not enough information available to complete the investigation. Do you see that?
I see that on this report, yes.
So you accept that there hasn't been a completed investigation into Mr. Langer's
If I
death?
see this and this is tabulated, it must be correct, ma'am.
Now, let's look at the information
sir.
that has been included in the ICAM report, Mr. Sinclair, and I've handed a bundle of documents to you which has just now been marked as Exhibit Quadruple F10.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Now, just to state that our records don't have a file 2, tab 14 to the ICAM report, although we were informed that we had the complete ICAM report and the complete annexures. We don't have a file 2, tab 14 in our possession. What we do have, though, is file 2, tab 15, which is the bundle of documents you have before you,
Yes.
and which appears to be the Lonman investigation docket into Mr. Langer's murder. Do you see that?
I'm listening.
And that's the documents that you
That's-
have before you, yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Now, I'd like to deal briefly with this annexure, Mr. Sinclair. And you'll see from 2.4 that the date of the offense is on the 13th at 3 o'clock in the morning. Do you see that?
I see that.
It's in between 3 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the morning.
I see that.
We see that the complainant is Obed Meko, who is a Lonman investigator. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You see on the next page that Mr. Langer was his occupation was a production, I think he was a production team manager, is that correct?
Production team means he's a production general worker, to my understanding of that term.
All right. I thought I saw somewhere that he was a manager, but we'll accept for now that he was part of the production team, and that he was employed at Safi Shaft.
See that?
Do you confirm that he was employed at Safi Shaft?
Well, I see it's there. I can't confirm that, but I see it's there. Yes.
All right. And if we can then go to the investigation diary, which is further down, 2 pages down, you'll see that this is the investigation diary relating to Mr. Lange's murder. And that it stated the African male person was stabbed by unknown people, suspects, at around 3 a.m. on the 13th, following the information from Simon Fundana. Do you see that? Do you see that, Mr. Sinclair?
Looking for it, but I believe it's there. I can't see it, but yes.
Who stays with the deceased at the deceased's house. In the same house. He alleged that the deceased was going to work at Safi. The deceased was identified as Julius Lange, and we've got his number, his work number, working as production team leader.
I see that.
The deceased had multiple wounds around the result. He could not help himself. No suspect arrested, and the Bethany police as well as LTRC members were at the scene, and no suspects were arrested.
I see that.
Now, if you go to the next page of this bundle, you'll see a statement from Mr. Meko, who states in paragraph 3 that on Monday the 13th of August, he was informed by Central Operations at 9 o'clock that there is someone who is lying on the ground between EPC and the railway. Do you see that?
I see that.
Now, can you just confirm for me, Mr. Sinclair, the positioning of Mr. Lange's body, is that on a route that is quite popular for workers traveling to Safi Shaft?
Mr. Chair, I have not been out to the scene, but what I understand from information that I received, it was between the Eastern Platinum Hostel. There is a road that goes from the hostel across to Sakwalani over the railway line.
Yes.
That is frequently used by our people and community.
That's correct. And it would particularly be used by people walking to Safi Shaft because it's on the way to Safi Shaft.
No, it would not. That would not be on the way to Safi Shaft, Mr. Chairman. That would be on the way to Eastern Platinum Hostel. So those people would walk across there to the hostel and then collect the bus service from the hostel to Safi Shaft, which was quite a considerable way away. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Now, we know that if we go back to page 4 of the ICAM report, we know that the ICAM investigators indicated that there was not enough information available to complete the investigation. From your side, from Lonman Security, was there any specific investigations done into Mr. Lange's death?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing, when there was anything that was going to become a police case or a police case, we would be very careful as to our boundaries on dealing with those matters. So this document that you have read through would have been a typical way that for our own information that we would have gone out and got the brief information, got the thing through, where the call would have come through, and done a brief, but we would not be involved in it because it was now a peace matter. So the limits were, and that is the instruction at all times to our CPU and our investigation team and ourselves, Mr. Chair. Is that the question you asked me?
It's part of it, Mr. Sinclair. What I'd like to focus on now is steps taken by Lonman Security before Mr. Lange's death.
Sorry, the state?
The steps taken by Lonman Security before Mr. Lange's death. Now, you were aware that there had been information received by Lonman Security that workers at Safi Shaft were particularly vulnerable to attack?
There were reports that had come through from just about all the shafts to that effect, not just Safi or K4.
But specifically in relation to Safi Shaft,
Yes.
that there was information available to Lonman Security that there was a specific threat directed at workers of Safi Shaft.
It could have quite possibly been, I don't recall it right now, that there was information to the thing, but it could have been through to the security team, yes.
Well, let's look specifically, Mr. Sinclair, the occurrence book.
Yes.
And if we could look at quadruple E19. At the entries on the 12th of August. And I'd like to specifically look at the entry at 1335. And what we see at 1335, Mr. Sinclair, is an entry, information received from Patricia that the crowd would be mobilizing to Safi Shaft tomorrow. Now, this entry is on the 12th. Tomorrow would be the 13th. The crowd would be mobilizing to Safi Shaft tomorrow because the workers are still working. Do you see that?
I see that.
So from this, it's quite clear that there was information coming through to Lonman Security that Safi Shaft in particular was a specific target because there were people working at Safi Shaft. Do you
I
see that?
concur, because of that entry, I concur that that had been received, yes.
On the 12th.
Yes.
Let's look further down at 1422. And we see another report, Mrs. Sinclair. Received information from Michael Makwena of Safi that when the workers are going to work tonight, they will be shot. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
So we see here, Mr. Sinclair, a very specific report which raises very serious concerns about workers who are to report to duty at Safi Shaft about their health and safety. Do you see that?
I see that.
Now, before I ask specifically what was done by Lonman Security, Mr. Sinclair, can I ask that we look at quadruple F6.2, which is your security briefing? And if we can look at paragraph 5 of the briefing specifically, we know that this was done on the 10th of August, Mr. Sinclair. Isn't that correct? I think you're going to have to verbalize your answer for the purposes of the record.
Sorry, I presume it's at the top of the
That's
10th,
right.
this
It's
one.
at the top. It was
Thank
done
you.
on the
Yes,
10th.
then it's correct.
And in paragraph 5, we see you indicating that a full security plan activated to cover all affected areas across the Lonman, taking into consideration employee safety, intimidation, transport disruption, access to shaft facilities and the likes, while staff maintaining criminal preventative measures across the operation. So what we see here is that you're committing to a full security plan across Lonman operations, specifically designed to ensure the protection of workers traveling to work. Do you see that?
I see that.
And again, just for context, Mr. Sinclair, it's true, isn't it, that at this stage, and particularly by the 12th, Lonman was encouraging its workers to come to work.
If I recall correctly from the human resources and management, that was what was happening, if I recall correctly, yes.
In fact, we see, Mr. Sinclair, in quadruple E19, an entry at 7:40 on the 12th of August. Towards the middle of that, you'll see message broadcast. Do you see that? Message broadcast through Radio Mafisa and Northwest FM that people should go
see
back
that.
to work.
Yes.
So we see a deliberate campaign at this stage, Mr. Sinclair,
Yes.
from Lonman, encouraging its workers to go to work.
Yes, I see that.
Now, in the context which we've described,
Yes, ma'am.
where Lonmin was actively encouraging its members to come to work, where there are specific threats made in relation to employees at Safi Shaft, and specific threats received by Lonmin Security, threatening the safety of those workers at Safi Shaft specifically. And in the context where we have already had a period of intense violence, starting on the 10th, specifically on the morning of the 12th, and then the evening of the 12th, with the fire at K4 Shaft and the killing of Mr. Mabebe. The question I want to pose to you, Mr. Sinclair, is what steps was taken by Lonmin to ensure the safe passage of workers travelling specifically to Safi Shaft?
Mr. Chairman, just to put this into context, the murder that took place was some 4 kilometres away from Safi Shaft. Safi Shaft is in the middle of our property. We've got a huge slums area, and then the Eastern Platts hostel, and the murder of this person was very, very far from this Safi employee. His murder took place a long way away from where Safi Shaft was, just to clear that point up. What specifics were taken place? We, on our deployment sheets and on our information that we had, with the resources we had, and given the extent of what was going on, and this, if I understand, this was on the 12th you asked.
Well, we know that Mr. Langer was killed at around 3 o'clock on the morning of the 13th.
So we're talking about what specific was taken place on the 12th, as the example is what I'm asked. Is that correct?
Leading up to the morning of the 13th.
So on the 12th, that was the Sunday, on the 12th, with this that had taken place at Vonderkop, stuff the day before, and across the whole property, we had a deployment where our security teams, we brought in whatever resources we could from the process security, which I alluded to earlier when I was on the stand. We mustered as many people as we could. We brought our own teams onto extended hours of work to utilize what we had to then place them across the property from Eastern Platts 3 shaft right the way through all the shafts to Caree 4 shaft. So we brought them extended road patrols, extended surveillance, and additional surveillance that could assist us around all of our shafts, including this at Safi. We would have had the patrols going in and out because Safi is a little bit remote. You go down the main road, and then you have to turn, so it's remote. We would have ensured that there were regular and visible patrols outside and the security inside. So we took whatever steps we could, bearing in mind that I have already, in one of my briefs, said I wasn't able to get hold of everything that we required. If I could just add to that, we then also had the police deployments had been started and activated by that time, particularly by Sunday afternoon. We had already seen, if I recall, General Mpembe and his teams, his people coming in. We were talking to them about where should they be deployed to assist us, because we were extended, so Lonmin were extended to a very big degree across the property. So we were doing that at the shafts and what we could with our people, and then those are the steps that we took.
Mr. Sinclair,
is that what you were asked?
For that, Mr. Sinclair, you had information that there were threats to burn the buses carrying the workers to the shafts.
Yes.
That would then put at risk the route from the hostel to the buses.
Yes.
Now, were those routes covered by these contingencies?
The routes with the people and the infrastructure and the vehicles we had, the routes were definitely covered and monitored. We had, for instance, a place that we were escorting out of where the loading zones were and where the drop-off zones. That was part of our security plan. Where drop-off zones with monitoring between points. We had tracking of the vehicles to see that is. So all of those within our capabilities and our capacity were put in place, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Sinclair, not only does Lonmin fail to protect this particular route, which you started off your testimony today under cross-examination by me, you started off confirming that this was a popular route because it led to the bus depot where workers would catch a bus to Safi Shaft. Now, not only did Lonmin self-evidently fail to secure this particular route, but we also know that the first time Lonmin discovers this body is at 8:45 the morning, despite the fact that Mr. Langer, we know, was killed at around 3 o'clock in the morning.
Mr. Chairman, that route from the hostel to the railway line and across is going beyond our property. It is, although it's exactly the same as the routes coming from Bapong. We have many routes coming through the remote areas from Bapong onto our property. We have many areas coming from the Marikana West and the other settlements and the other informal settlements. So that route, there is not the capacity at Lonmin to cover every one of those remote routes. And if you take the plan, and I explained on the plan, you would see the vastness of this. It is just not possible for us or us and the SAPS to actually cover all of those routes in the circumstances like this.
You can't protect the workers on their way to work.
Say again, sir?
So you couldn't protect the workers on their way to work. You could protect them some parts of the routes, but not the
And we put in, through what we've been asked about the scenario planning, we put in our contingency planning. Where are the possibilities, the buses? The Karee hostel loading through to Forbelt was a particularly vulnerable area that we knew. So those were the Eastern Platinum loading at the hostel. From there, we know that there had been intimidation at that bus thing. So we put measures in place to have visible policing within our capacity and within our capability. If it was just a strike area at Eastern Platts, for instance, we would have been able to cover it far more effectively.
You're not really answering my question. The point is, there was a strike over the whole of the property.
Yes, sir.
There was obviously an intention on the part of the strikers to try to ensure there wasn't work done at any of the shafts.
Yes,
is
sir.
that right?
Yes.
You didn't have the resources to protect the whole of the property. You didn't have the resources to protect all the workers all the time when they're on their way to work.
That is absolutely correct. But we tried we tried to plan our best to get to where we could potentially anticipate these things to protect. So we tried with our capacity to our best to get to those places and do that.
I understand. So you were trying to protect perhaps the majority of the workers. Is that right?
Very difficult, sir.
Yeah, I know. You see, that's why I must put to you that there is a difficulty when you broadcast a message over two radio stations, to the effect that people must come back to work. And you don't, knowing full well that you're exposing them to risk, that you can't protect all of them all the time over all the routes, there's a distinct prospect, regard being had to the fact that the information is that the strikers are planning for war, as it's put in the report, that some of your workers on the way to work, the non-striking workers, could be injured and possibly killed. Despite that, you send a message over the radio to these people and the streets come to work. Is that, am I summarizing the facts accurately?
You are summarizing correctly, sir. The message was sent over the radio. The that there were additional plans put in. For instance, the K3, and if I could just talk about that, because it'll cover...
Would you forgive me if I suggest that we do that after lunch? It's already gone over to lunchtime.
So,
make
so
a note of the
short-
point. Make, okay, short explanation.
answer.
Give it now,
That,
then we'll
for
have
instance, the K3, and that would have happened across all the shafts. The managers would have tried where people are coming from the remote areas, like Bapong and those sort of areas. We said, guys, assemble there and move together. Or we would move off the property and we would get on together. So we did take other precautions. But yes, I agree with your statement. I agree with what you put to us, that it was extremely difficult, bearing in mind the radio messages and those sort of things, sir.
Thank you. Advocate Hemrose is going to ask a question, and then once we've got your answer, we'll take the lunch adjournment.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Sinclair, your realization that you didn't have the capacity to protect the workers that had been asked to report to work, was that conveyed up the line?
Ma'am, I believe so, and I believe, I can look it up, but I believe it was in one of my briefs that it is there.
Sorry to interrupt you, but specifically that you were unable to protect all the workers.
I don't
that
know
you
if
had
I
asked to
was
go to work.
absolutely specific, but definitely my direct report was a very knowledgeable man, and he would have taken what I did to understand that as well, I believe.
I'd be most obliged if you could point that out to us
I'll
after
find
lunch.
it, ma'am.
Thank you.
You've got the whole of the lunch 3/4 of an hour to find that passage.
It'll take me 2 seconds, so thank
All
you.
right. All right.
Thank you, sir.
So you have time for lunch as well. We'll take the lunch adjournment.
Thank
We'll
you,
come
sir.
back at 10 to 2.
Okay.